Hi, it's Adam. I'm the Intrepid Eater, and I'm coming out to you today from my home on Buck Lake in eastern Ontario. And it is hot today. It's sitting at about 35 degrees Celsius and with a very high humidex, and it is way too hot to cook. I can't even imagine turning on my oven here. So what I have planned for today is to bring my cooking outdoors and cook over the fire instead of heating up this house, which is not air conditioned. So what I'm going to be cooking today on the fire is actually based on a recipe from Mamushka, one of my favorite cookbooks. It's from Olya Hercules. It's a kind of a Ukrainian cookbook, and this is a southern Ukrainian dish called tuzluk. Basically, it is mutton cooked in a broth over a campfire and served with raw onions. So what I'll be doing today is going to be similar to that, except I'll be using cuts of lamb shoulder, as I can't find mutton right now. And I might be augmenting the recipe with a little bit of stuff from my garden if I have anything down there, so we'll go down and see. So basically what I'll be doing is cooking the lamb shoulder in a broth slowly over the fire with some onions and maybe some flavorings. Once that's all cooked and nice and tender and falling apart, I'm going to remove the meat from the broth, add in some herbs, some potatoes, and perhaps some stuff from the garden. And then I'll serve the meat back into the broth with raw onions and some fresh herbs, and it's going to be delicious. So to start, I'll be taking these 3 onions. They're relatively small. I'm just going to peel them and quarter them. After that, I'm going to peel some garlic cloves, and I'm going to add those in as well. So to quarter an onion, basically what I'm doing, I'll take the top off, like so. Slice it in half, leaving the root end on. Take the skin off, both sides. And I'm going to just take a tiny little bit off the root end, just to get any of that dirt off that could be in there. But I don't want to slice it too far in because I don't want my onions falling apart. So now we have the 2 half onions nice and cleaned up. I'm just going to cut those halves into halves, lengthwise. And there we have it, quartered onions, and they go into the pot. Next I have this head of garlic here. It's a nice head of purple garlic. I'm going to basically take off a couple cloves, like so. A little tricky. I'm going to do 5 cloves. 4 and 5. And then I'm going to give them a similar treatment, just basically cleaning them up and taking off any of the papery skin. And I'll throw those into the pot as well. And I'm veering a little bit off recipe here, but I tend to use recipes more for inspiration rather than sticking directly to them, if I do use recipes at all. And although this appears to be a very lovely recipe, I can't help but add a few more extra flavors into the broth. So I have some cilantro and some flat leaf parsley here. And although the tender leaves might not do great in the stew at the beginning here, I'm going to add the stems, and those are going to add lots of flavor, and they're going to break down into the broth as it cooks over the fire. And then when I add the fresh herbs, basically the leaves from these, later on, the flavors will echo each other, and I think they'll be very nice. So what I'll be doing here is just removing mostly the stems from the parsley and the cilantro. And what you'll end up with is basically a handful of kind of the tougher stems that a lot of people throw out. I generally don't because they're just packed full of flavor. I'm just going to take the base of them off as they're a little discolored and old. And then what I'm going to do is chop them pretty finely. That way I don't have to take them out of the soup at the end. But they'll still impart all that flavor, and they'll just become a part of it. Give those a little mince, and then they go in the pot as well. So if you're a lamb lover like I am, you've probably found that it's not that easy to come across in Ontario. You'll see it in the grocery stores sometimes, generally overpriced, often from New Zealand. There's just not many lamb producers around. If you can find a farm producing lamb and purchase directly from the farm, I encourage you to do so because they have a much better product. But to find pieces of lamb that suit your needs, you're going to be better off finding communities that eat a lot more lamb. Greek, Middle Eastern, South Asian communities generally eat a lot of lamb and mutton. And if you go into those types of grocery stores, you'll often find a lot more selection of different cuts. What I've found are these lovely shoulder cuts. And as you can see, they're very fatty. They have bones. There's a lot of connective tissue. The shoulder is a hard-working muscle and therefore builds up a lot of connective tissue. Often when you try to just grill these straight, you might end up with a little bit more chewiness than you'd find in, say, a loin. But what they do well in is in a broth or a stew or a slow-cooked meal. So I'm going to cut these to size, and they're going to go into the pot as well, and they're going to cook down just beautifully. So I've got my boning knife here. I'm going to break these down into more manageable pieces. So I'm going to find in between the bones, and I'm just going to cut them into kind of like a 2x2 piece. So they're going to be large, and I do want them large, but they're going to be a little more accessible for, finding in your bowl. If there's very fatty pieces, I might cut those down a little smaller. Those can go in. And do the same here. Doesn't have to be pretty. We're not doing something that's super fancy. We're just doing kind of like a rustic campfire broth. So just making your cuts nice and big and rustic. If there's a bone like this that's really long, doesn't matter, throw it in. This is going to add to the general look of this dish, and it's going to actually come out very nicely. So lastly, I just have to add the seasonings into the pot. So what I have here is some coriander seed. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take about a tablespoon out. I'm going to add some salt. I'm just using kosher salt here. So a nice big, maybe 2 big pinches. And some pepper. Freshly cracked black peppercorns. I have them in the mortar and pestle here. And what I'm going to do is just bash them apart a little bit. I'm not going to grind it down to a fine spice because it's such a rustic kind of soup or stew or broth. I'm just going to pound it a little bit. I'm going to get in there. I'm going to break apart the coriander seeds just to the point where they're kind of flaky but not finely ground. And there they are there. That's about the consistency I'm looking for. I'm going to add that to the broth as well. And next we're going to add the water, and that's about it. Okay, so now we have it full of water. We have our broth ready to go down to the fire. It's going to be a heavy pot, so I'm hoping the tripod holds up. I'm just going to cover it with a lid just for the time being so I don't slosh it everywhere on the way down, and we'll see you at the fire. So I have my tripod set up here with the pot hanging on it. You want a strong enough tripod to handle the weight of, first of all, a heavy pot, but also what's in it. Have a little fire, or some wood and paper set up here for the fire. I'm going to light it and get this thing going. Okay, now we have our fire going. This is going to cook for approximately 2 hours, so I'll be out here maintaining the fire, making sure it doesn't get too hot, moving around the coals, and keeping an eye on the soup as well to make sure nothing's burning or it doesn't run out of water. Make sure you never walk away from your fire. So we'll check in a couple times, but I'd say there's about at least 2 hours of cooking ahead of us. Okay, now we have the broth at a rolling boil. So I've got my wooden spoon here, definitely not plastic. And what I'm going to do is just carefully skim the top. Any of this foam that builds up, it's just impurities in the soup. And by skimming it, we'll have a nice clean broth. And you're just going to want to be careful not to singe your arm hairs off here. I've already lost a few. So I'll just continue skimming this over the next hour and a half or so. So I just went out to the garden and walked around the yard a little bit to collect some items for a salad. So I just wanted to go through them here with you guys. We have some sorrel, which has a nice sour flavor that goes great in salad. We have some broadleaf plantain, which is a wild edible. It's a delicious salad green and it's also medicinal. We have lamb's quarters, some dandelions, which adds a little nice bitterness to it, some cucumber flowers and a cucumber from the garden. We have nasturtium leaves, some borage leaves and borage flowers, which taste kind of like cucumbery and they're just beautiful to add to a salad. Some nasturtium flowers add some nice pepperiness, some chervil and chervil flowers, which has almost an anise flavor. It's very delicious as well. A watermelon radish, which adds more color again and a little bit of bite. And 2 different types of basil, which will give that nice floral herbaceousness, and then some freshly harvested little grape tomatoes. So to prepare the salad, I'm basically going to be using mostly my fingers. I'm just going to kind of pick apart everything here and toss it in the salad bowl. And keep in mind we are on the lake here and it's a hot day, so there's people out enjoying themselves. In case you hear some background noise, I'm going to go through my basil, just pick it apart. Now all I'm doing is just pulling it with my fingers like so, leaving out any stems. I like herbaceous salads with lots of bright flavors, and just throwing whole herbs in here like this really accomplishes that. Now onto our nasturtium. I'm just gonna break these down a little bit. Have some nice beautiful gem-like flowers and petals. I'll just pull these little stems off. Got our dandelion greens. If you're averse to bitter flavors, you're going to want to go light on the dandelions, but I like having a little bit of bitterness in my salads. It's nice to have a bit in there. Okay, we got our lamb's quarters. Lamb's quarters are a wild edible, and they're often found in disturbed areas. And I found this stuff growing actually in my garden, so that made it very convenient to harvest. A lot of farmers get lamb's quarters, and a lot of gardeners find it too. And it makes for a nice little salad green. Got our broadleaf plantain, and that I think I will slice up a little smaller because it also has a bit of a bitterness to it. Broadleaf plantain is actually a medicinal herb as well, and it just grows anywhere. You'll find it in the yard, you'll find it in sidewalks, in the cracks, you'll find it growing up through pavement. It's a very tenacious kind of herb. If you've got like a bug bite or a small wound, if you chew it and then rub it on the wound like a salve, it will actually take away a little bit of the pain and a little bit of the itch. It's nice, but it's also edible, so I'm going to throw it in the salad here. I got my sorrel, which is one of my favorites. I grew this in the garden. It's another thing that's very hard to find in Canada. I rarely ever see it in any grocery store or even farmer's market. But it's got this lovely sour flavor and it just goes great in salads. And I found I've had to buy my own seeds and grow it myself. Okay, now we have our cucumber. Maybe I'll just cut that in half. There's nothing better than a beautiful, fresh cucumber, just harvested. Just gonna cut that in half moons. And our watermelon radish. You can see this beautiful pink color here. What I want to do is just take the peel off, because it's kind of tough and inedible. You can use a vegetable peeler for that, but I didn't bring one down with me, so I'm using the knife. And I think because there's such a beautiful design in there, I want to leave it whole. But I want to slice it quite thinly as I can in this position here, because it's quite peppery and quite hot. So you don't want huge chunks of these guys in there unless you like it really hot and peppery. Then go to town. So you can see these just beautiful little watermelon radish rounds. They go in there. Lastly, we have our tomatoes, These are gonna roll off of me, so I'm just gonna cut these in half, I think. Just a simple slice in half. Okay. Almost done. And it's nice and fun to cook outside. Find yourself a nice little spot to do so. It's wonderful. Everything tastes better outside. Okay, next we're going to throw our potatoes in. So I've got a little hodgepodge of red and white potatoes, some small, some big. This was just what I had around. So what I'm going to do is just cut those into bite-sized pieces. I don't want anything too small, but I also don't want anything too big, so maybe I'll have these guys. So I'm going to take the potatoes and I'm going to throw them into the broth. There's about 20 minutes left, so that should be enough time for these to get nice and tender. I've also got a couple nice fresh Ontario carrots. I didn't grow these myself, but I bought them from the farmer's market, so I thought they'd be really nice in there too. So I'm going to cut these somewhat large. I'm going to throw them in with the potatoes. And they'll just add another, like a splash of sweetness and a splash of color into the broth. Next, I have a sweet onion and some garlic. I know there's onion and garlic in the broth that's been cooking for, over an hour and a half now. But I want some nice bite from the garlic and a nice bite from the onion when it's nice and fresh. So I'm going to add that in at the very end. This is a genius part of this recipe in that it creates flavors at the beginning and at the end, and those echo back and forth and make for lots of contrast, which is really nice. Now I'll take the garlic and I'll just slice thinly like this, and then continue to mince it. We got a little bit of carrot in there from before, but that's okay. Just going to continue to mince until we get it nice and small. I'll continually regroup and mince again, regroup, and mince again. This is a great technique. I know a lot of people use garlic presses or different techniques for this, but what I like about this as opposed to a garlic press is that you can decide exactly how small you want your garlic. Do you want it into a paste? From here I could go and I could start sweeping it across the cutting board and turn it into a paste. Do I want a rough chop, a small chop, a light mince, any of those things? I can choose exactly what size I want if I do it the traditional way with a knife like this. And this is the exact size I want. Next we have our sweet Vidalia onion. All we're going to do is slice this up. So the way I do that, I'll cut the top off, I'll cut it in half, and I leave the root end on. From here I take off the skin, which sometimes is easy and sometimes is not easy. It's about half and half today. You want all that brown skin off. Here we go. And then all I'm going to do from here is slice into half moons. You want it nice and thin. And those are going to go into a bowl with a little bit of salt. And then going to rest for about 10 minutes in the salt. And then I'm going to put them into the soup just before serving. So maybe I'll just put it right into the bowl and then ladle the soup over top. That'll provide a little bit of crunch and this sharp, beautiful onion flavor and a little extra salt too. It's going to be delicious. So lastly we have our herbs, and I want lots. I like lots of herbs. I think you could define my cooking by having lots of herbs in it. So what we have is some dill I just pulled out of the garden, some parsley, which I didn't pull out of the garden because the chipmunks ate it all, and I have some cilantro as well. So what I'm just going to do is take the whole bunch here all together, and I'm just going to do a rough chop on it. And that's going to go right into the broth in the bowl. So it's not going to cook. It will soften with the heat of the soup, but it won't actually cook all the way through. It's going to add liveliness, vibrancy, lots of flavor. It's going to give life to this soup. Okay, so our stew is all done. The meat is just falling off the bone. The carrots and potatoes are soft. It's been cooking for about 2 hours and 15 minutes or so. So all that's left to do is toss the salad and a little bit of vinaigrette, which I made out of olive oil and a white balsamic vinegar and a touch of honey. And then after that, we'll just ladle this into the bowls with the salted onions and garlic, the chopped fresh herbs, and I put a little bit of Aleppo pepper in there just to add a little bit of spice. And then we're good to go. So here we have the finished product. We have our beautiful lamb broth with carrots and potatoes, all those fresh herbs, the chopped onions and garlic, all nice and fresh and crispy, going alongside the soft onions and garlic that we put in at the beginning. And I have a feeling it's going to be delicious. And I'm right, it is very good. It's picked up all those smoky flavors from the fire. It's got that richness from the lamb, and the herbs and the onions cut right through all that richness, creating this beautiful bowl. I'm very happy with this. So that's it for me. Once again, I'm Adam, the Intrepid Eater. And if you're hungry for more, make sure you check me out on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you next time. So that's So that's it for me. I'm Adam Berkelmans, the Intrepid Eater. I don't know how to sign off. What should I sign off with?